Hello everyone, this is the second episode of Audiobookish. My name is Fahed Rahman.
And I'm Poppy Knight.
And today we will be reviewing Sandi Toksvig's Almanac 2021. Poppy, do you want to give a brief description of what the Almanac is about?
Yeah, so here's the blurb. It goes, Toksvig's Almanac is intended merely as a starting point for your own discoveries. Find a fabulous or infamous woman mentioned, and please go looking for more of her story. The names mentioned are merely temptations, amuse-bouches for the mind, if you like. How I would have loved to have written out in detail each tale there is to be told, but then this book would have been too heavy to lift. Let Sandi Toksvig guide you on an eclectic meander through the calendar, illuminating neglected corners of history to tell tales of the fascinating figures you didn't learn about at school. From revolutionary women to serial killers, pirate nuns to pioneering civil rights activists, doctors to dancing girls, artists to astronauts, these pages commemorate women from all around the world who were pushed to the margins of the historical record.
And I'll just read a brief description of Sandi Toksvig. Everyone knows who Sandi Toksvig is, but Sandi Toksvig is a British-Danish writer, comedian, broadcaster, actor, podcaster, and producer on British radio, stage, and television. She's also a political activist, having founded the Women's Equality Party in 2015. She's written plays, novels, and books for children. In 2016, she took over from Stephen Fry as the host of QI. And in 2020, she launched a podcast series called We'll Get Past This, which was aimed at providing a virtual chicken soup for the soul during the COVID-19 lockdown in the UK by sharing stories of notable women from her book collection. So what were your kind of initial thoughts on kind of listening to the book, Poppy?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to have to start with the fact that it isn't necessarily my kind of thing. So, like, the subject matter isn't necessarily what I would go for. I kind of wanted to listen to it because of Sandi Toksvig. I'm a big fan of Sandi Toksvig, but kind of learning about history and things like that, I'm not massively bothered about. I quite like a lot of, historical things, but I don't always choose to go and listen to it. And obviously I am extremely, extremely grateful for, the trailblazing women that it mentions in here, for the freedoms that they allow me in my life. I extremely am, and there's nothing to be put down on that. But I don't kind of actively go and search for more information about them in kind of just general terms. But I did really enjoy it. So I think a lot of my thing, and the reason I maybe might end up being a bit more on the critical side as we go through this, is because it isn't necessarily something that is yet in my comfort zone. But I did enjoy it. My overall impression is I do think it's really good. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I quite enjoyed it as well. So I've read a few of these. I don't know what the correct term for them is. Historical listicals, I think, is maybe one way of describing them. So, one of my favorite graphic novels of last year was Brazen Rebels, which is very much in the same vein as this book, which Brazen Rebels, it kind of explored stories of unheralded women, sort of women that should have genuinely a higher profile in the public consciousness than they do. And then kind of in a different vein, I read a historical book called The Atlas of Extinct Countries, which again was a historical listicle book, kind of really brief descriptions of like episodes in history. I quite like that because it does give you just a little taste of these different things. I quite enjoyed the book. There are a few things that I was a little bit critical about. So yeah. So where do you want to kind of like start with your kind of criticisms?
I think my first criticism would be that I feel like the cover should have been purple. There's a big bit in the intro where she's talking about purple, and she's talking about a female writer whose pseudonym was the Japanese word for purple. And she kind of describes her mission for the book as we go in search of patches of purple, of these other women that have been left out and anonymized and things like that. I heard that, and then I looked at the cover and I was like, why are you not purple? So there we go. That's my first criticism.
Yeah. whenever you're doing like historical listicle books like this, there is always kind of this danger that you're giving not enough information about certain things, which I think that was very much the intent of the book. But it's one of my criticisms is that there were certain figures that she mentioned. As well, talk a little bit more about her because she sounds really interesting. Don't move on from that yet. But it's a kind of, I think, is very much the intent of the book was to just provide you a jumping off point.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm with you because there was a bit of an imbalance, wasn't there, with some who had quite a substantial part, and then some that were just kind of their name was said, and it was go and find out about them, which will partly just been based on Sandi's interests and stuff like that. But I'm with you, and I especially think it's linked into one of my other points that with an audio book, certainly as it is at the moment in just tracks by month, basically, it'd be very difficult to go back and find that kind of 10 seconds where she mentions that person's name so that you can go and look them up, assuming you can then spell it right based on that and stuff like that. So
yes, that's exactly what I was kind of thinking as well, was that when you're reading a book like this down, so very much with Praise and Women or some of the other historical listicle books that I've read, is that you can flick back through the book and kind of like note down a name and then kind of Google it. There were certain names, so she covers quite an international list of women, and some of them I don't know how to kind of spell the names. So it's difficult to kind of like go on and then do further research into them. So I think there's specifically one name. I think she mentioned something called the Frigdgun Queen.
Right.
I have no idea how that's supposed to be. what am I supposed to? Yeah, so that's a criticism I very much agree with. I think it's probably worth talking a little bit about kind of the structure of the book.
Yes, of course. So she starts off every month by talking about the month in general. Does some kind of cool stuff that I really enjoyed about the etymological history of the name of the month. I really quite liked that, and some other things just about the month in general, and then kind of goes by the first of this month and talks about at least one woman who's kind of connected with that date. It's usually either their birthday or the day that they died, and gives a little brief thing, or sometimes less brief, sometimes very brief, as we just talked about them and their place in history.
And she also usually gives a poem of the month that's either, I think most of them were related to women in some way, and I quite enjoy that. I don't read a lot of poetry, so that is quite nice to be kind of exposed to different poetic voices.
I'm completely with you on that. I thought the same.
But again, kind of similar sort of criticism that sometimes the name of the poet or the poem, it goes by so quickly, and then you're struggling to kind of like track back through the audio to find where it was mentioned.
Yeah, I think this is something for anyone listening who's considering listening to Toksvig's Almanac, is deciding what you want to do it for. If you're really going to want to dig into the reference and sort of, do what she did when she was writing it, sort of style or anywhere like that, then maybe you do want the paper one, or maybe you want both. Or maybe you want to get an ebook and then you can search even easier for the things that you're finding. But if you're kind of like me and you sort of just want Sandi to tell you some interesting stuff, then the audio does work really well. So it is a difficult thing, because I was going down this track of really kind of criticising it doesn't really work as audio. But I was like, I'm saying it doesn't really work as someone who I'm not. I'm saying it doesn't really work if I was really that bothered about all of them. Yes, there was some I wanted to look up. But to be fair, for me, I think it probably was the best that it was in audio, because I could sat and get told these interesting stories. Whereas I don't know that I would have sat and read the book, certainly not for as longer periods of time as I did when I listened to it.
Yes, I think that's an interesting point. So I think the good thing about these listicle books is that they are, I don't know if it's the correct term, but they're a little bit like toilet books. So you can, books that people sit down in the toilet, you read a little bit of it, and then you can kind of like come back to it later on. which I think is an absolutely disgusting habit. But
I get you,
anyway,
yeah. I thought that when I was doing this that you could kind of, you could listen to a month at a time. But I did think that was a criticism I had again. I think it would be difficult for you to do just a day at a time. Like,
yeah,
maybe you could if it was in physical book and then you see the next subtitle and you stop. Certainly in audio, it was difficult to then you just stop at the right time. But then even if there was a way that you could split it to just hear the day, I think you'd end up a bit put out by the fact that, yeah, some are super short and then some are really long. And if you were trying to fit that into a routine, I don't know how that would work.
yeah. I think the way you describe listening to it, kind of having just listening to a story by Sandi Toksvig, I think is probably the best way to kind of go about it. She's got her voice is incredibly listenable too.
Yeah.
If it's like so comforting and intelligent, and she's got like a really unique rhythm to the way that she speaks as well. So there's no one that speaks that the way that she speaks is so noticeable. It's, no surprise that she's on TV and radio and theatre and kind of everywhere.
Yeah. One thing I did find about that, and it's a weird thing that I haven't that I've noticed before. So people that I'm used to talking to me on TV in a really quite a natural way, so like presenters, and the time I first noticed this is about comedians. When they then read me a book, sometimes I don't like it. So I ended up buying Trevor Noah's biography in print because I listened to the audio and it just felt really strange because when he's doing stand up, he's talking so naturally. And then when I was hearing him read his book, I was hearing him read his book rather than him telling me his book. And it was just something about the slight difference in the voice that was too weird for me and I didn't want to. And I felt that a little bit with Sandi as well, because I mean she's reading off a prompter for QI most of the time, but still it seems kind of natural conversation-y. Whereas this was very definitely she's got a page in front of her and she's reading it. So I did like it overall, but it's a bit weird.
It's interesting that you say that. I felt that her performance was really naturalistic.
Okay, yeah.
I felt that, I just, obviously she's reading off the page, but it didn't feel like she was kind of constrained.
No, yeah.
In any way.
She's definitely a very good reader. I'm definitely with you on that. And it is it is natural. Yeah. It's just that imagining the page bit that I have a weird thing about.
Yeah, I think the reason I say that, there were a couple of flourishes or moments where she's struggling to pronounce the name of a woman that she's mentioned, and she's just kind of like, yeah, well, it's probably pronounced something like that.
Yeah, no, I love those moments. I was going to talk about those. I'm going to call them, related to the last podcast, I'm going to call them my Mr. Gunn moments, because it was the time when they'd adapted the paper to be, okay, I know that we're audio now. So like in the intro, and it was actually in the bit that I read out, that it said about the book being too heavy to lift. I heard that and was like, oh no, they're not going to adapt it. That's really annoying. And then, yeah, it got further on, and like you say, she was talking about pronunciation and stuff like that. And I was like, yay, you've changed it. You've acknowledged that people are hearing this rather than reading it. And I thought that was really good.
Yeah, and I also quite enjoyed whenever they. So I've not read the book in paper, but kind of the musical notes that you would use to denote either the change of the month or whenever she was going to recite a piece of poetry was also something that I really appreciated as well.
Definitely, because it's difficult with like quotes and things and stuff that isn't your voice when you're stepping out of your voice. It's difficult to denote that in audio, and yeah, I do think they did that pretty well.
So I'm kind of going on to the actual content of the book. Who were kind of like some of the standout characters or people that were mentioned that you either knew about before and found quite interesting or hadn't heard of before?
See, I knew you were going to ask me this, and and I tried to pick it, but I think again it goes back to what I said at the beginning, that it isn't necessarily my thing that I'm massively interested in. So I found that most of them were an equal level of interesting for me, kind of at the top. And then there were some that were slightly less interesting for me, but I had very few individual standouty ones. There was just quite a lot that I really did find interesting, but nothing that I thought was unbelievably, amazingly interesting. I made a few notes about a few, but I found it really hard to pick individuals. It's gonna sound really bad, but I just enjoyed it as a thing. It partly went in one ear and out the other. It was a very enjoyable time while it was in the middle.
Yeah.
But I didn't necessarily retain it. I think I will listen again and will find more and will go and research more, but there's no one that massively stood out to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think this is one of those audiobooks that you can listen to kind of numerous times, because you will pick out different things each time you go through it. So for me, a couple of the characters that really stood out, and I've not even written down her name. So there was a mention of a Japanese suffragette, which I thought, oh, that's quite kind of interesting. And then I can't read my handwriting. Mary Read pirate, and I think that's Calico Jack. So I think there must have been like a female pirate captain that was really. Oh yes, and then there was the Chinese pirate captain who was the captain of the Red Flag Fleet. She's someone that I had heard of before, so but is a nice reminder of that as well. One of the themes that I noticed that was going through the book was about how history is written and how men are really good at taking credit for things. I was just wondering what you noticed or what you felt some of the themes running through the book were, just aside from kind of getting these women's names out there.
I get you about that, and I think one of the things that I didn't enjoy about it was that it was just reminding me about a whole lot of sexism kind of throughout history and some kind of present day stuff. There was a lot of it that is just, well, that sucks and it shouldn't have been like that and it shouldn't be like that now. So like you're saying about kind of men taking credit and stuff, I think that was a big thing. And that's the running through it was a lot of this. For some of them, this shouldn't be newsworthy, this shouldn't be almanac worthy, because this should be, hundreds of thousands of women that were doing this at the same time as well, and there weren't. So that was a kind of a sad theme to it.
I don't know. I felt kind of what the tone of the book was generally quite hopeful, but there's a lot of sad stories in here as well.
Yeah, that's it. I agree with you. I do think the book was a hopeful outlook overall, and it will have, partly been my mood at the time and things like that. But there were times where it felt a bit relentlessly sort of, well, that's just awful. Why was it like that? Why could it not all just be equal kind of thing?
Unfortunately, history does tend to be relentlessly awful.
And then we go back to why I don't tend to pick those.
So I can kind of understand. I think one of the kind of in that vein, one of the stories that did kind of stand out to me, I think I'm really terrible. I should have noted the name.
I'm glad it's not just me then.
It's I think Sandy, if she does listen to the review of this, is not going to be too.
We're very sorry, Sandy. We did love your book.
Yeah, we do. It's a really, we'll get onto recommendations later on, but it's a really pleasant listen. One of the stories that did stand out to me was one of the leaders in the French Revolution, and she was basically betrayed by her male comrades who wanted egalitaire, equality, but just not for women. And this kind of basically kind of turned around and said, I expect my wife to be at home fixing food and looking after the children. So there's lots of stories like that about women being let down by men as well. So
but then, like you say, I think the overwhelming tone is that the resilience and the fight against all that does come out of it, which is positive.
Yes. So I think in terms of, we've been talking about the book for about 20 minutes now. I really enjoyed it. Overall, I think there are kind of issues with it as an audiobook format. I'd be quite interested to read the traditional print form of the book to see how that compares, because I think that'd be quite interesting to see compare and contrast that. But overall, I think there's a lot of interesting stories in here.
Definitely.
I really enjoyed it. Sandi Toksvig is so kind of charming, and it's so enjoyable kind of listening to her voice. You're not really going to have a bad time with it, but yes.
Yeah, I agree. I did think occasionally some of the things that she was saying about stuff, especially things that weren't kind of within her cultural knowledge and upbringing and stuff, she was definitely going from that point of view. And obviously everyone is, anything that anyone writes or says or anything is from their point of view, and I appreciate that. It's very unavoidable that it's from that point of view, and its judgments are made based on that. And I think some of the ways that she spoke about them, maybe in print would have kind of seemed more witty and casual, but I found when she was saying it, occasionally seemed a bit judgmental. And I think it's fair. She's going from her point of view, but that's maybe something people want to be aware of. Yeah, I agree with her of saying that she shouldn't be confined to only talking about her experience. I agree with that, and it's a difficult topic that certainly rife at the moment, and it is a big deal. It does deserve a lot of thought and thinking about. But yeah, I do think it was good that she was branching out beyond that. But yeah, there are moments where you can tell that she's branched out beyond that, and maybe isn't maybe a little judgmental. I guess that's basically where I'm going.
Yeah, I think it's always kind of we're getting into issues of like cultural relativism and all these sorts of issues. It's really tricky to judge. I think with Sandi, if there are any kind of like judgmental moments, it's not coming from a place of hate. It's just kind of like she's just using her personal experience.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. It's just that, you need to go into it being aware that it may be written about the world, but it is written from one person's perspective on that.
Yeah. And that's another aspect of the book that I really enjoyed a lot, was that it is a truly international book. She tells stories of women from Africa, Asia, America, and it from ancient Greek to kind of like modern day. So there's a lot of really good information in here. Lots of fascinating women that do deserve to be better known.
Definitely. I mean, as we've discussed, I don't massively dig into it, but yeah, I'd barely heard of any. I mean, I knew Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I think was one of the only kind of super recent ones, and some of the big names in civil rights and stuff, but they were less touched on as figures. They were more mentioned because you would know about them. Yeah, the ones that were actually focused on, I hadn't heard of any, unfortunately, because they do deserve to be told about.
I had heard of a few of them. Most of them I hadn't, but then again, that's because kind of last year I did read quite a lot of historical listicle books. But yeah, I think it's well worth picking up. I think it was published in November last year, so pick it up, guys. It's 9 hours long?
9 or 10, I think.
Yeah, 9 hours. Yeah,
and it doesn't matter that you've missed the beginning of the month. By the time you get it, that doesn't matter at all.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to listen to the audiobook in the order in which it's kind of like spoken. So yeah, that's it. That's kind of a firm recommendation from me.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think it's nice that we can like something and then also nitpick at some bits that we want to be critical with.
That's kind of what criticism is. Criticism doesn't necessarily mean being mean and nasty about something, but it's kind of like, all right, why does this work or why doesn't this work, and what you didn't enjoy about that. So yeah, guys, I think that's 2 thumbs up from both of us. Thank you for listening to this episode. We'll be releasing an episode every couple of weeks. We haven't decided which book we're doing next yet, so we'll let you know via social media. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at audiobookishpod. It's the same handle for all 3 of those, and I'll be including a link to our bookshop.org accounts where you ought to be able to download the audiobook through bookshop.org, and it will just kick us a little bit of money as well. Anything else you want to mention?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, recommend it. And
okay, that's great, guys. See you guys later. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.